Whatever you're doing today is what you'd be doing in the 1930s. Have you seen the meme at the threads on Reddit? The world is moving fast, but sometimes it just doesn't feel like we're actually going forward. National politics being defined by isolationism, retribution, and malfeasance. Jobs are disappearing. Civil rights are continuing to be threatened. And important institutions such as journalism and the arts are being gutted. People are feeling either malaise or fear about what's going to happen next. But what would you be doing if it was the 1930s? This kind of at its root is a challenge when people are posting this and talking about it. It's a call to stand up to fascism and stop the trend towards autocracy in its infancy. And honestly, that's a lot to take in, especially when many of us are just trying to get by and just trying to survive right now. But two Jewish teenagers sat in a bedroom in Cleveland, Ohio in 1938. That was when Austria had just been annexed into Germany. These two teenagers were just one generation away from their family's roots in Ukraine, the Netherlands, and Lithuania. They gathered and they wrote a sci-fi story based on the Nazi ideal for humanity, the Ubermensch, the Superman. And spoiler, he was a villain in that story. But that villain arc only lasted for one tale. The character was redesigned and retooled, asking questions like, what if instead of being an agent of chaos, he stood for decidedly American values like truth and justice? What if he disguised himself as the most noble of professions, a newspaper reporter? What if he was an illegal alien raised in America's heartland? What if he was using his talents to serve the entire planet and not just those that looked like him? These early Superman stories were based on real events that affected the creators, Siegel and Schuster. The Athens, Ohio mine incident of 1930 made its way into their pages. But it was when the trauma unfolding in Europe as anti-Semitism was turning even darker that Superman's mission to defend the weak came into the spotlight. He stood up for the Jews here in America and around the world, even confronting Hitler within the pages of his book. Now, yes, this was just a story, but it was also radically hopeful, shining a light in very, very dark times. Superman was created by two young outsiders in a time that shares a lot of similarities to our own. On today's Neighborhood Comics Convo, we're discussing that legacy and what Superman might be if he was created today.
Need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented. It's a social validation feedback loop.
Swipe right if you love me, and I'll hold you tight. Never sign off of me, don't unsubscribe. Stay with me surely through woke diatribe. Digital approval.
Stephen Robinson is a playwright and columnist with credits that include Wonket, The Onion AV Club, and Spy Magazine. I met Stephen in the offices of the Red and Black, the University of Georgia student newspaper in the mid-1990s. I was already a fan of his columns about music and film and was thrilled to discover that he was just as charming and funny and handsome in real life. You can follow along with Stephen's work at his Substack newsletter, The Play Typer Guy. Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, so good to be here, Lee, and to chat with you as always. Yes, you're one of my favorite former classmates, including Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It's her, it's Danger Mouse, it's me. I feel like it's really so happy to be included in such esteemed company.
Yes.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, have you seen this meme, this concept I feel like has been floating around more and more recently in my circles, that idea of whatever you're doing right now would be what you were doing in 1930, whatever, with the rise of fascism?
Definitely. And for spring break, we were in New Orleans. We went to the World War II Museum, which is great if you've seen it. And it's very chilling, a lot of the stuff that we're kind of the stuff we're sort of doing again, not sort of the more obvious, like, Hitler and the Holocaust and Nazis, but specifically the American response, like literally America First movements, and literally saying why why is anything going on in these other countries of concern to us, to the point that we only get involved when we're literally attacked, as opposed to actively saying, hey, this guy has taken over Europe, maybe that's a problem. So it's yeah, that definitely stands out. It definitely stands out because Superman is a was created in the late 30s, shortly before the war, was very woke in that sense of was attacking uh, Nazis. Obviously, some unfortunate um, ways of attacking the Japanese, but definitely the quote unquote bad guys. He was overtly opposed to. And you mentioned how Siegel and Schuster creating him. Something I've written about, because I think Superman has had challenges with adaptations to film, definitely compared to Batman or even Iron Man, right? Like he's not, and this is sort of his, not say last hurrah, but this upcoming James Gunn film would be sort of the ultimate proof of concept. Like if you can't, do better than a Doctor Strange movie, for instance, like, okay, are you really the world's greatest superhero? But I think something that pops up for me is that if you look at the first appearance, the first cover of Batman Detective Comics, that's Batman, the grim figure sweeping in with the villain. Amazing
Purple
fantasy.
gloves. Yes.
Yeah, which I love. I have that. I have that version of the figure from the Scott Snyder's and Greg Capullo's run. But and Amazing Fantasy 15, Spider-Man. The kid swinging through. They mocked me. They mocked Peter Parker. Wait till like that's the character to still 60 years later, 80 years later in Batman's case. This is that character. Whereas Action Comics #1, the question is that the character? Is that what people think of? Is that Christopher Reeve? Is the guy lifting a car, smashing it, sending a bunch of punks who had, messed with him and kidnapped, like running for their lives, where the focus on that cover is on the guy being, holy crap. And in that story, how much of him is sort of Batman-like, right? Like he comes in, kicks the crap out of a wife beater with the famous line, "You're not fighting a woman now." We just froze him against the wall. And saving a condemned man, all these sort of things, and tying that clearly to sort of the crusading journalist. There's a purpose. There's a reason why he does what he does, and how different that is from sort of almost to the point where maybe that has been lost, like the idea of, well, who is Superman? And so what do you take of that? I know.
Yeah, no. I think that's really interesting. And I think that initial Action cover is iconic simply because it's like this first concept that we're seeing in popular culture of superheroes. But it is much more of a question rather than an answer. Is this a good guy? Is this a bad guy? He's destroying private property. People seem to be scared of what's going on. And you do have to read the story. You have to get inside it, which is a pretty stark contrast to Superman #1, where he is, above the city and kind of looking down and has his little angle pointing and seems much more of a messiah in that sense, which I think that is obviously a pretty important part of how later writers and artists have interpreted Superman and what that type of a character could be if they were real. But how are you personally introduced to Superman?
Me personally, he's interesting. He's one of those characters who you might have the same experience. He's everywhere, right? Like,
Yes.
It's hard to not know when he's not in your consciousness. I do remember the first Superman film, seeing it on ABC, the 2 parts, staying up like very like, okay, is Superman in this movie? Because when you're like, however old I was, 7 or 8, you're like, where is Superman? I was promised Superman, and I'd already had some bad experiences with convincing my parents to rent The Thing
Oh,
and
no.
Iceman, And like, where's Ben Grimm?
Oh no.
Where's Bobby Drake? This is a very boring Iceman movie. And but this one I was promised I would see Superman, but I have a very clear memory, and I've shared this with my son because he loves hearing stories of his grandfather raising me. But like my dad, I'm watching it with my dad, and finally the big triumphant music comes. He's the training scene in the fortress with Jor-El, and he's like, there he is. And it's like, I'm getting very excited. Oh, right. Finally, there's Superman. And then he flies off, and then it's like another 30 minutes until I see him again. They hold you back on this, but yeah, I mean, I had Superman figures. I think for both of our generation, the Super Friends, those was huge. To date myself, I think not to be like sort of kids today, but it's just sort of I was literally an adult when like Batman animated series. That was my freshman year of college when that debuted, and so being in a Georgia dorm in the lounge where everyone's watching it and everything. That's where and then the Superman cartoon debuted when I was just starting. I had just moved to New York. But prior to that, as a child, really, it's like Superman of the, Super Friends, and those were kind of the concepts of him that I knew and remembered, and it was fun. I think I do remember reading the as many folks of my generation, again, the John Byrne run
when they actually rebooted Superman, and we got a Superman #1 in the in the 80s. Yeah.
And Adventure of Superman, it was a visual feast. Like, it was sort of a visual shot in the arm, because I remember when I would, you're a kid, you've got like a bucket, a quarter in your pocket, you're flicking, and it's just like, okay, which book? It would be very hard. Okay, well, this Marvel book looks better than this Superman comic, with all respect to, but Kurt Swan or Kurt Straffenberger, towards the end of their careers, it was like, if you're a kid, it just wasn't jumping off the page the way, a book with Wolverine literally jumping off the page at you was, with the artist there. So Byrne, who had worked for Marvel and had come in, but this was my first exposure to him, it was visually, exciting, though, and I've touched upon this, I've written upon this, a lot of it doesn't age as well. It doesn't have sort of, and again, the problems with Superman versus Batman, like, meanwhile, in Batman comics, I remember getting some of the first Norm Brayfogle, Ellen Grant comics off a stand, and just these are stories that you go back, they hold up, and like introducing characters like Scarface and the ventriloquist, who seem like they've always been there but are relatively new characters. The stories and the Batman there's big things occurring, whereas Superman, it was like, Rampage or Silver Banshee.
That's always the Superman problem, right? Is that he's either overpowered, so he can't have any foes, or he is too vulnerable to something silly like a rock. It's creating stakes for someone who almost by definition can move planets, in different parts of this lore. How do you make that interesting? And I know that we've talked in the past about both of us having a real affinity for a lot of the Silver Age action and Superman stories that are very, very silly compared to a lot of the stories that, current creators are putting on these kind of myths to rebuild them. But where does your affinity for that Silver Age come from? Do you have any stories that really pop for you that are like, oh, this is a silly World's Finest arc that everybody needs to read?
Well, all of them. When I was a kid, or in high school, and I pretty much collected the entire Silver Age run, which you could do. I'd be the old man. I'd be the old man coming to your shop, being, "Why are they so expensive? I could get these for $1." And you're explaining, "Well, they're when you were 16, that Silver Age comic was as old as Hush is now.
Yes.
I could show you,
Isn't that
it's
wild?
20, it's just 20 years. Now it's like, it's going to be a bit more expensive, but I was like, every week I was grabbing those, and I love those stories. They're just so anything could happen, and it was broad and exciting, which again, in retrospect, as I was thinking of like, okay, well, this burn stuff is really nicely drawn, but doesn't feel like anything could happen. I mean, I don't
Right.
like these covers. It's like, oh my God, what, these crazy covers he's changed into. It's just, it's everything in the world. Like it was explosive and exciting. Some of my favorites, obviously, Death of Superman, a lot of the imaginary stories. So the first Death of
Yes.
Superman, which is very good.
Where he
There's
ages and gets old and is in an old folks home. That's the run we're talking about.
Oh,
We-
that's a different one. That's where he uses he can't time travel for some reason. They said, okay, well, you can't time travel 24 hours, but there's an emergency in the future. So be, he can't, it's time travel, Superman. Just chill out. Wait, you can get, the future will still be, no. He has to get to the future while he can't time travel for 24 hours. I'm 15, so I don't care. It's like,
yeah.
fine, I get it. I get the stake. So he uses a dysfunctional Legion time travel bubble. When he gets to the future, he's aged 1,000 years, but he still has all his superpowers. And
The
then he
gray
just
hair.
gets, yeah, and he gets, and it's about over 3 issues, and he gets, bored. He keeps traveling further into the future. Earth is blown up. He decides to create a new Earth, so he kidnaps these two cave people, bring them in, and sets them up because two people can repopulate the Earth. He
Goes
believes
from
that.
Messiah to God. Just that
Yes,
house.
and then he just keeps getting more bored, and he breaks, and he kind of comes back in a circle, and he's normal again. But it's insane. It's insane, and I think that goes back to what you're saying with stories. Like we can think of classic Spider-Man, like so many classic Spider-Man stories that have wound up being adapted to the film. Death of Gwen Stacy, death of Captain Stacy, his origin, all these Batman stories that got adapted and everything. And there's sort of a theme of okay, well, Batman can be a mob story. He could be a gangster story. That's your through line into him. He can be gothic horror. That's a through line into him. You could do a 7 of him, or you could just do he's like, it is crazy, like the Adam West show, which is very much a faithful adaptation of a part of his run. With Superman, the idea is like, I've rarely seen versions of the character adapted that went to the idea of anything could happen, and it's insane. Sort of
Right.
like, what you saw when you watched Buffy and Angel. Sometimes when I was watching that, it's like, well, this is a lot of Silver Age, and they would have that light touch, but there's a sense of we can't do this with Superman, so you get something, in my opinion, where Zack Snyder comes on and it's like, well, this is kind of dreary and depressing, and that's not what appealed to me about Superman. Superman was like, it was all fun and exciting. He, I don't necessarily. I worked in journalism. I don't need the realism of Clark Kent and Lois going through the county records. I did that. I know that's journal, but like, oh, and here's this expose. It's like, no, I like the idea that no, there's a lizard people civilization under the earth, and we're gonna go get that story. And that's what reporting is, because when you're an 8-year-old kid, you want to believe that that's they saw mummies in a different part of the universe. We're going to go travel. They're going to pay for our travel to do this. And like, those are all the ways you could kind of handle this character, but they seem to not want to do that sort of anything goes aspect to him. They sort of like are sort of afraid of it, partly because yes, it's crazy. It's a sitcom. Like
Yeah.
a rock will make him change into, a puppy or something, or
Yeah.
he's got a talking dog. I'm very happy that James Gunn has brought the talking dog. Well, not talk. He didn't talk. He was just super intelligent, but
We'll
he
see.
did not talk.
We'll see if he talks. The jury's still out. We'll have to find out when the movie comes out. One specific aspect of Superman and his traditional origin story that I've been thinking a lot about recently, just with the political landscape and everything else that's kind of just going on in the world. And you and I are both Southerners. I think we can
Yep.
say that. And his growing up, the ruralness of Kansas, the farms, the small town, that kind of aspect of it. I've been thinking a lot about that and how, as a character he grows and he moves other places, but that's still his home. It's still like one of his safe places, a retreat. His parents stay there in most iterations of the story. Did that kind of ruralness, the small townness, any of that ever resonate with you as you were reading these stories?
Uh, Not especially at the time. It's sort of interesting because a lot of the earlier stuff, there is a sense that Clark Kent is a city kid, or
Yep.
that he might be coming from upstate of wherever Metropolis is. I think by the Silver Age, his parents were like in the small town. They were essentially like, running a general store.
Yes.
And it was, Byrne. I mean, the movie also very much did the kind of Norman, uh, Rockwell type depiction of middle America. But, Byrne kind of came in and decided, okay, he's from Kansas. Kansas is where he gets all these values. It's kind of eye rolling, but I get it. Yes, middle America. That's who he is. And the kind of inherent tension there is that, yeah, I mean, growing up in rural South, I knew a lot of people who were such decent people and good heartful, and the idea of that being that's Superman's strength. I mean, one of I use this passage all the time on in my own work. I'll include it's from All Star Superman, my favorite Superman story. Grant Morrison at his funeral, Clark Kent talks about Jonathan Kent taught me that the strong have to look out for the weak, and bullies don't like being bullied back, which is sort of the core of who Superman is,
Yeah.
and the idea of that coming from humble, good people is sort of, does resonate. I mean, the challenge with kind of the origin is that, though, how does that reflect to our own politics, our own world now? Because with Batman, the idea of it's actually gotten more resonant. Like our cities, in certain ways, there are the idea that the Waynes would get gunned down in the middle of the street, even in the 80s, seemed strange. It was just something you sort of accepted. But I think now there is that tension of people feeling like cities have gotten more dangerous. You walk
Well,
in
would
streets and
Luigi
there's
Mangione target probably not the good doctor Wayne, but I don't know. It could be.
who knows?
Yeah.
He probably had to turn someone down. He's a billionaire, and they're all bad. I mean, that's the problem with such reductive thinking,
We all
right?
know. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, Joe Chill was man of the people. Again, that would be a great story, right? Like now of like having there are people in Gotham, some idiots who are being like, "Hey, Joe Chill, he took it out for that 1%er, Thomas Wayne." But
Okay, I'm writing all this down, by the way. Joe Chill, hero. Got it. Okay, cool. That's,
um,
that's mine. Copyright. Sorry.
but
Okay.
sort of an inherent concept of Superman's origin is that he is an illegal alien, and I wrote this piece
Yeah.
about it, and I thank you for sharing it. But it's inspired me because I was I was listening to the Talkville podcast, which I enjoy, from the Smallville cast, Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum. They go through old episodes. Slight tangent. They also talk about one way into Superman having always been that he's all powerful. When are you, despite that, when you're the most vulnerable, when you're kind of young and stupid.
Yeah.
So, one way is when Byrne removed Superboy and Versions removed Superboy, it makes a kind of, well, that's a great way to get. I mean, I feel like the Flash TV show sort of did that with the idea of he's kind of has that optimism and hopefulness of Superman, while at the same time is a guy trying to figure out his place in the world, which is a way for us to connect with him. And then, as I say, you can't kind of get rid of Superboy when Spider-Man exists. Like
Right.
you can't, Spider, because a kid who's 10 years, my son is picking up a comic and he's kind of like, well, Spider-Man is obviously weaker than the guy who's playing football. Why this, like, why is he wandering around figuring out what to do? Like in Man of Steel, Spider-Man is actually helping people at 15. So why is it Superman doing this? And so that's sort of the inherent tension of trying to figure out, well, when do you have an obligation to help people, or and so forth? And that goes back
I think
to
that leads right into, yeah, exactly, that idea of having to hide who you are, to have to blend in, to have to not draw attention to yourself, to have to do a lot of things that people who may not have come into this country during the normal paths, or may have overstayed visas, or any
oh yeah
number of reasons, you can't be who you are, because that's just going to brought all the wrong attention back
oh
to
yeah
you.
and
Yeah.
I think what was interesting to me when I was sort of viewing the comments, I picked out one comment and I sort of hid the name to just kind of respond to my article on, but so many of them, it was a sense of everyone kind of, oh, Superman's he's not an illegal immigrant. He is an illegal immigrant. He's literally an illegal alien. Alien, I could
Yes.
say, is a very dehumanizing term, but no. He is literally an alien.
Literally.
And everyone is sort of trying to find a reason. Oh, it was fine. It was fine. It was just sort of revelatory to me, because it's like, no, I tend to be someone that's like, okay, well, your policies need to fit your exceptions. So, because your policy is that, like, when they talked about the unvetted Syrians, that was a big deal there. It's like, Superman is completely unvetted. He is so the Kents, and so you have to kind of figure out, who are the Kents? Who are these people in Kansas in this who took in this, because the correct thing to do is that this ship lands, obviously not an Earth ship, like it's not something we've created, and it's, you should try to find their parents. I mean, I think there's stories where Martha Kent would be like, oh, well, we're protecting him because their parents put him in a ship. You don't know that. I'm not going to put my own kid in a rocket ship. I would put some random kid. Find this person's parents, whoever experienced, but they make no effort. So the proper thing is to turn this child over to the authorities. Also, don't store dangerous alien technology on your planet.
For sure. Put it next to the tractor. That's a great place.
What it did, like this, it might explode. You don't, like, it just crashed, which I love about
all your crops. Like, it's just leaching, nuclear ooze, and nobody's saying, oh, let's dress him in this fabric we found in there. Let's make him a costume out of it that grows with his age.
Yes,
So many
what I do love about the Bruce Timm 1986 version is the ship actually lands. It doesn't crash, because it's kind of like, I went to all this trouble.
Why would it crash?
It just sort of lands. So it's like, boom. I was like, well, no, it's a good thing the Kents came by and stole. So who are the Kents? Why would they? Because the proper, and what's so interesting, again, all these comics presented to people of multiple political persuasions or ideologies, always the idea of where he is actually taken and vetted, given to the government, put in control, because he is a kid. We don't know what he's going to do. We don't know, okay, he's shooting lasers from his eyes. Is that normal or dangerous? Like, can he control it? Let's have professionals, doctors and scientists looking at him for all his life. But we understand that that's a bad life. We don't want that for Clark Kent. That would be bad. And every what if and every else world shows that it's being negative.
It's the ET scenario, right? So you tint the house, you keep him inside, so he's not getting sunlight, so he's not exhibiting these powers, he's not becoming and so he's just like wasting away while Dr. Spock and Pride, this baby, and and instead they just forge a birth certificate. I'm a Superman birther. I want to see Clark Kent's birth certificate right now.
Well, John Byrne, because in the 80s, so one backdrop I would like to address, because, and I really, what really holds up, I found his immigrant status for about 15 years for the Bronze Age, from 1971 to 1986. They really leaned into that of him being an immigrant and respecting his heritage. He had essentially tiny Israel in the fortress of Solid, Kandor. And Byrne removed all of that with the idea that, well, he's American. And even having his reorigin storyline, Man of Steel, ending with Superman learning about his origin and being like, "Who gives a sorry to
Yep.
curse, but who
Oh,
cares?" It's
yeah.
essentially it's meaningless. And at the time, you're like, even now, and I reread it recently, I was like, but you're these you're alive because of and this whole world, everything. Just write a damn book at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
Like these people exist, or like or what it means in the world to carry on their culture. But Byrne really, and I think he might have even used it. I don't want to quote that he said this because it's terrible, but he kind of likened it to kind of, college students wearing dashikis or whatever to connect to
Mm.
their heritage, which, obviously is offensive. But no, I mean, Superman wanting to carry on Krypton as the culture of one, because he's the only one
Yep.
that's left, is not an inherently bad thing. But instead, it was a very 1980s thing of, no, that doesn't matter. I'm an American, and I'm born in America because I was born when the ship, opened, which is an interesting case for authorities. Like, again,
When does life start? When your spaceship opens?
that's an immigration attorney could discuss. Obviously, we know where our current, what Pam Bondi would be like. No, what do you?
No.
No, it's
No.
It's an alien.
Yeah.
It's the first of a fleet of aliens. I mean, Zack Snyder's, even has that being. So, yeah, like it doesn't fit anything. Like the revenge fantasy at the core of Batman endures, right? Like
Yes.
that this guy comes in and kicks ass, but the idea of this alien coming and the world embracing it is even gets darker when you look about obviously with billionaires. So Byrne was the first to introduce the idea of Lex Luthor as the billionaire, evil billionaire. Except this Lex, obviously, because he has to hide that he's terrible. Because obviously the public isn't so stupid to embrace a billionaire who's openly evil and
No.
openly like he has to actually pretend he's a philanthropist, he's a good guy, his public persona.
The 80s were so simple.
Yeah, but if you read Man of Steel, one gaping problem with that is, well, Metropolis seems fine. So in all versions of Batman, Gotham is a hellhole. All right, that's Batman needs to clean this up. Batman needs to give Commissioner, Lieutenant Gordon a hand in going against the mob and everyone that's corrupt, and he's gonna fix this. Whereas the Superman's like, okay, well, Lex isn't that bad then, right? They've got hover cars, the technology's great. Like, what is bad? I mean, the Smallville show at least tried to have the idea of this corporation came in and what corporations do when they come into small towns and so forth. But if Man of Steel, Byrne never goes that extra step of like Luthor's presence even being felt in Kansas or Smallville because Clark Kent's too busy playing football and being a ball hog and showing no journalistic interest. So I'm gonna complain, as I've always been like, well, why isn't Clark Kent is me? Why isn't he like us? Why isn't he reading comics or reading books, or like the idea that he needs to be this football player who is a jerk never made any sense to me. It's like, well, no, I shouldn't. I probably shouldn't use my powers this way, or maybe I just have different interests. Even though I could fly or do all this, maybe I just have different interests. Maybe my interests is to be a journalist because that's something I want to know about the world and other people. And but yeah, Lex Luthor as the billionaire, that concept was never fully explored because the idea is like, okay, well, what is Superman correcting? So all they establish is that Luthor is jealous of Superman and he can't buy Superman, so he tries to kill him. And what, to me, the big plot hole when I reread this is like, okay, well, as we've seen in our own world, perhaps, and maybe that's what's shocking. Okay, half the world now hates Superman because Lex Luthor can control the media. He can control, now Superman is a 50-50 proposition.
Right.
Just like as we saw with COVID, we saw with so much in the past with Anthony Fauci, with anyone, everyone becomes a 50-50 proposition in this sort of society we live in now. So that's what's so Superman becomes Spider-Man, which of course that's not a character Byrne or others want to write. Like, oh well,
Right.
we don't want it where half the people distrust him, and but like, okay, well, you're saying then that Lex Luthor as a billionaire is less effective than J. Jonah Jameson, just a guy running a newspaper and talking about how Spider-Man sucks. Like, I think that's kind of like if you're kind of go into billionaire Luthor, that's the, otherwise just have him be a mad scientist. But if you're going to lean
Right.
in to that, I think I don't know, the Justice League cartoon I think had one of my favorite versions of Lex Luthor, and that's the one where at one point he says his whole season long gambit has been to ruin Superman's reputation because now when I kill him, they will build statues in my honor, which to me
Yeah.
is a sort of the one sentence description of what Lex Luthor wants.
I love this. So Joe Chill, not that bad. Lex Luthor, questionable. He may be the hero story. He's always the hero of his own story, which I think is how you make a good villain. Period. Is that
Oh yes,
the villain thinks they're the good guy, right? I mean, that's the really compelling. They have an argument. They have a point of view. It's not just that I'm crazy or that I'm jealous or vindictive. It's because I feel like I'm taking into my own hands what this hero should be doing, and I'm doing it the right way.
well yeah,
Yeah,
you have to show if the villain wins, what's the bad, and that's been a struggle of
yep.
Superman. They can't really show because we get an idea of like the mob running our cities and crime everywhere. That's bad. The bad guy's winning. You know, in Dark Knight, the Joker is a terrorist. He's killing people. We're all living in fear. That is bad. Whereas even in Superman 2, it's like, oh, well, they will just kind of deface Mount Rushmore, which itself is defaced, by the way. I think we don't like all they're doing is just changing the defacement. That's my own
Insane.
little rant. It's
Yeah.
because every version of Mount Rushmore is shot to make it make sense. So it actually see you almost need to point that you think, oh, what a wonderful marvel. And if you actually see it, it's pulled away. It's like, oh my god.
They just blew holes in this rock. Wow.
It's like really, it's really interesting to me. So, but yeah, like the idea of even again, billionaire Luthor and the Batman v Superman movie, they don't. Well, we Luthor trying to do bad things to Superman is bad because we like Superman. I get
Right.
that, but they don't show this guy. What is the bad thing about this guy existing and being in control? I think it's because it's hard to confront the idea of a billionaire and a corporation running things.
Especially when your company is owned by Warner Brothers, who may be owned by who knows who by the time this comes out. I mean, it is none of these things exist culturally, kind of exist in a vacuum. But I want to come back to that idea of the 50-50 Superman, the idea that he's not universally popular. And I think that plays really well into the Absolute Superman, which launched this year. For those of you who haven't read it, DC has launched this Absolute Universe, which is essentially a little pocket relaunch that includes a lot of its key heroes. And for Absolute Superman, the tagline for that book when it launched was, "This Superman has no family, no fortress of solitude, and no home." So they kind of take these three elements of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and it's kind of filtered on down from there, and they take away three things from the origin story. And so with this Superman, he comes to Earth as an adult and already has a background from Krypton. He already kind of is formed in a lot of ways. And he uses his powers not just to lift up cars and smash them, but to wrestle with things like class disparity and environmentalism and like direct labor support. It's a really, really kind of interesting take. It is grounded and it is on the darker side because we're dealing with these real world kind of things. And in many ways, he is like an opposite of the smiling do-gooder who's just out to make the police happy. He's actively a criminal because he's taking down these illegal mining operations in South America, and he's doing these kinds of things that aren't necessarily global. They are kind of micro in a way, but are outside of kind of our singular US worldview. Have you read any of Absolute Superman yet?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because it speaks to, again, I sound like I'm slagging modern Superman, but the movies and the characters of answering why. So
Yeah.
with Peter Parker, responsibility. I looked the other way. My uncle died. This is what could, every time I look the other way, someone's uncle could die, and that's really resonating with Batman.
I was 8 and I saw a movie. I will keep other 8-year-olds from seeing a movie.
Same movie. Yes. So instead of becoming Batman, he just created streaming, and everyone's much
Head
safer.
of Netflix, Bruce Wayne.
But Superman's why, so why he does it.
Yeah.
The savior thing never connected to me. I felt that was somewhat self-serving. The idea of I'm sending you my only son, dude. Your planet's blown up. You're sending a refugee.
Mm-hmm.
You're not helping us. Your kid is gonna die unless he leaves the planet. So it's less Jesus, more Moses, but also
Yes. Literally baby in a basket. Yep.
The why being, well, the arrogance of his planet. So the first they kind of established very early on, I think in Action Comics #1, this idea his planet blew up from old age, just general died. But later they have the classic Jor-El, Krypton is doomed, which sort of explains why an advanced race didn't just leave, why they're resorting to putting the kid in the, it's because they are so arrogant they ignore science, which would never happen, Lee.
Never. Not in a million years. I mean, they've got flying cars. There's no way that's going to happen there.
You just could never advantage. I always make fun of this one lady. I did again in my piece in the Superman movie because with Jor-El explaining, and she comes up, it's like, it's fine. I tell you, Krypton's just shifting its orbit. And I'm like, that's still, what are you talking about?
I mean, that is mass flooding, earthquakes, ripping apart, just a mass extinction event. So yeah, no worries.
Let's just go home. Like Jor-El's looking at her, it's like, yeah, well, that's on page 4 of my of my presentation. Shifting orbit. Yikes.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm going to make sure I send my son to a place where if he kisses a woman, she will forget what happened.
Yes, the magic rupee powers.
Superman's favorite power. The kisses take it all away.
So the why there is this planet is arrogant. It ignored. It essentially created its own destruction. So to the extent that Batman trying to stop what killed his parents, the why here should be Superman is someone who's trying to prevent environmental catastrophe, civil war, if that's a version, because there's some versions where it's Zod makes the planet blow up because it's a civil war. There's but that should be what motivates him. If it's all just he's born on Earth, he's all American football player, and he's just a good guy, he wants to help us. It's like, okay, we'll make him a mutant. Right.
Well, then,
like,
or he's
there's
the
no
Frank
reason he's from another planet
working for the government Superman. Like he is just another weapon in the army's arsenal. If we're doing just the red, white, and blue salute version of him,
there's no if he's from Krypton that needs to matter as a writer. I was like, well, you that's why I was screaming whenever we read Man of Steel. Oh, this doesn't matter. Well, why did you mention it? Like it has to matter.
Yeah.
So his culture, wanting to continue that culture, wanting to sort of learn a lesson, like my parents are dead because of this. How can I prevent these things from happening? Also, how can I make people listen when they don't want to listen? I'll be a journalist and be a crusading. So there are ways to kind of connect that through line, I think. But instead, I think people keep getting drawn to Space Jesus or Superman who makes no choices. Superman is kind of like, I got powers. What do I do? And then I just put in my cassette tape and my dad will explain to me, okay, well, you're Superman and now go do Superman stuff, which is not particularly compelling.
Well, it's no wish fulfillment from a young reader, that's for sure. Oh, I'll just go do what my dad tells me. That's awesome. I think you can attest that that would be a really unpopular superhero.
Well, Joro has no powers either, so
Yeah,
literally it would be I don't know. I've not been to a yellow sun. This is all what you can see through walls. Wow.
yeah. I
I
just
don't
thought you
know
could
how to
kiss
help you.
women and take their memories away. I had no idea
That's
you
the
could
only
like
that's
blow
the,
ice.
that has nothing. That's just a native. That's a native Kryptonian ability.
Yes, they all can do that.
We all could do that. It's
And that's the reason their planet blew up.
so
uh,
that that should be the why. That should be the. So I
yeah,
like the absolute sort of
yeah,
appreciation of that's who Superman is, and that's what he represents. And Lex is someone who either sort of like in Black Panther, Killmonger is a villain who challenges sort of who T'Challa is, but also challenges him in ways that maybe he should change in certain ways. So what
yeah.
is Lex compared to if he's just sort of a bad guy, like um I don't know, the Byrne version always sort of annoyed me. There's one where he figures out Superman is Clark Kent is Superman. He's too egomaniacal to accept that he would pose as that he would be Superman. And he just sort of says, gets all this stuff out of my computer and fires the lady who found it out. And sort of a couple years earlier, there was a storyline, Daredevil Born Again,
Mhm.
where Karen Page is hooked on Daredevil's former girlfriend, hooked on heroin, sells out his secret identity for a another fix. And this reaches the Kingpin, and Kingpin's like, okay, well, this is a name written on a cocktail napkin, and it was given by a junkie. But all right, let's test this theory. Go destroy this man's life. What's it to me? So it shows how evil he is, but it also shows that this gangster, this petty thug, is more capable of the scientific method than Lex Luthor. Because all you have to do is like, oh, well,
Yeah.
that's weird. What? It's just glasses? Okay, well, I didn't think that. Okay, we'll just go kill his friends and family and let's see what happens. And, I'll see you in the
I
morning.
love that you're calling this. This is literally like, well, just gotta try it and see what happens. I guess this is the
He's
14th dude we've done this to this month, but okay.
You've killed as well. Eventually, we can.
Every junkie in town is giving up their landlord. It's weird. They're all landlords. Okay, got another one.
It's
That and
another one.
CEOs of health corporation of insurance
Exactly.
Well, a few years ago, much to a lot of pundits' dismay or delight, they changed Superman's official tagline from "Truth, Justice, and the American Way" to "Truth, Justice, in a Better Tomorrow." I feel that kind of plays in a little bit with this idea that you're talking about, with like recognizing about what the origin story for him, perhaps how that should be emphasized and reframed.
Yes, better tomorrow. Of course, because everything's a 50-50 in our society,
Yes.
that meant that, they're woke and they don't like America. America
Right.
is this wonderful, we're a nation that fulfills our obligations to our allies, and we're not bullies, and we are clearly the American way is what Superman, except Superman's not Captain America. He doesn't represent the
Correct.
American dream. The American way can shift. Like at least the dream, you could say it's
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
and it's pristine and untouchable. But the way is like, okay, the American way, even in the 40s was like, yeah, I don't know. That's the American way is pretty bad for a lot of
Yeah.
people.
For a lot of people. Right.
So, A Better Tomorrow connects. He was literally the Man of Tomorrow. Was one of his nicknames, so that seems to fit. And yeah, once again, he's not. The questioning of why is interesting because the idea why does Batman dress up like a bat? He scares the crap out of criminals, and it looks cool, and it has the bat coming through. There's all this sort of stuff that goes straight to it. Why does Superman wear this outfit? Oh well. Maybe his dad gives it to him. I'm too tired right now. Like I'm sick of that. Like he can't come up with his own damn costume. Maybe his dad comes up. Well, why does he wear an S on his chest? Well, it's Kryptonian. It's either the symbol of Krypton, which makes him sort of Krypton man,
Right.
or it's like his family crest. So it's
Crest. Yeah.
just sort of like, "Hi, I'm Lee Man,"
Yeah.
which is
I'm.
great. That's cool. Thank you. I love that I'm Lee.
Yeah.
But and it has to look like an S so that Lois will say, "Oh, Superman." It's a little overly complicated because they can't just accept that inherent in the character is someone who is going to call himself Superman, right? It's just, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
just a friend." And that's all you need to know. It seems like a very bad 70s pickup. Who are you? Like the next morning, they've had their adventure, Lois and
Yeah.
putting on his boots. Who are you? A friend. And then he just
Boo. He says a big F on his shirt.
it's like, well, what's your actual name? He hasn't thought that far. He really thought that he could
No.
just go through just telling people a friend. It's like, oh,
All he
I
has
think
to
you're
do is
good.
kiss him and get out the back door. I don't know.
But yeah, like this is an S. This is an S. I'm Superman. I have superpowers. It's okay. Which again, I think if you have him be younger when he first puts on his identity, like he's 17 or something. I mean, I think but you've got to once he's able to once he clearly is stronger than say anybody. He's like lifting trucks and stuff, and he probably should be helping people actively. Show him doing that.
Yes.
Show him getting more engaged. Show him trying to be a journalist, but like figure out who he is as a character. I think the biggest problem with him is where the idea that you would do a Batman show where Bruce Wayne moves out of Gotham and just happens to live in a small town and with his kids would be what? Is that still Batman? But you could do that with like Superman and Lois because we really kind of don't know who Superman is. He's not him being in Metropolis, him being a reporter. It's like, well, wow, that's weird. Like these things, then what does matter about the character if these aren't the core? Like again, Spider-Man being in San Francisco would be weird, right?
Yeah. I love this. I love how much time you've thought about this. This is wonderful. Well, I'm about to test you. I'm about to test you on it. I'm about to see how you can put that all into action. So hear me out. So it's 2025. And in this scenario, you're a teenager. You know, your son is almost at this age, and you're like looking for something that's like escape and fantasy and wish fulfillment. And in this alternate 2025, all the bad things are happening in the world, or all the things are happening in the world just like they are right now. But the one thing is that superheroes don't exist. This fictional, we've got sci-fi, we've got fantasy, we've got all this stuff. But the idea of caped crusaders and such, not a part that developed along with our jazz and baseball to make us what we are. So you're in this role. What does a superhero, a Superman, a super whatever, what does that look like to you? Like, what do you think if that was, we're totally just out of the box spitballing here, but what do they look like? What are their goals? And then, ultimately, how do you start conveying those stories? The whole superhero idea and how it reached max proliferation, has to do with those roots, has to be printed on the pulpy paper, has to be a dime at the newsstand, and it progresses along with us. So if we're starting out fresh in an age that we have smartphones, we have easy international travel, we have the ability to video conference like we're doing right now with people on the other side of the country, what would that be? What would that kind of, is there something that's already kind of filling that place right now? Or, do superheroes, would they even exist in our current climate without having a history?
Yeah, it's a very good question. In Marvel comics, but also in the movies, they've always been able to sort of, superheroes still exist in that world. So people will reference Superman or whatever, these concepts. And Superman, like on Smallville and other shows, will have to sort of skirt around that because Superman looms so large. So what exists in that world? And they don't. Yeah. So, if Clark Kent is someone born, now, if he's 25, he was born in the year 2000, he's someone who watched Star Wars, right? Like these Star Wars
Yeah.
prequels or whatever.
Yeah. The
Um,
prequels. Yeah.
and these are stories that I think do. I think your question, I think, does trip back at, well, what distinguishes superheroes in a way
Mm-hmm.
from a lot of when we live in a sort of golden age of fantasy and sci-fi. So my son loves Star Wars and the
Yeah.
Clone Wars and all that sort of stuff, and he enjoyed Harry Potter less so, like Percy Jackson. Now I think he doesn't like chosen men myths or
Yeah.
transphobes. I guess maybe that's part of
Notorious
the
turfs. He's got a big problem with those. Good for him.
but those all those stories, those big things that kids have liked, have good, evil. I mean, Darth Vader. I mean, how do you? The big challenge for Doctor Doom, who's coming up soon. It's like, well, how do you do Doctor Doom who isn't, that's not Darth Vader? I recall perhaps more than a year ago, thinking, well, one challenge would be, how do you get people who don't know Doctor Doom, once you show up, how do you get people not saying, well, that's just a guy in an iron suit? It's not just Iron Man.
Right.
And it's like, okay, and so
Guess what?
so they fixed that, Lee.
Yeah. Fixed it. No problem. No problems at all. Well, luckily,
Maybe he is Iron Man.
with a lot of stuff that actually I feel like has worked, that's come out of Marvel Studios over the years, is stuff that has been tried and true from the comics. And so the fact that we actually do have a comic series where Tony Stark is Doctor Doom is kind of like, okay, all right, maybe we can wrap our heads around this and we can see what's going on. I mean, right now in the comics, Doctor Doom is Sorcerer Supreme. So, like there's plenty of room later on for Benedict Cumberbatch to also wear the mask if he had to.
Oh, yes. I mean, that was not to get too far, I'll go back to your question.
Yep.
My classic Victor Von Doom, my hope would be that Robert Downey Jr. surprises us all. And he's like, this is a world where I was an Iron Man, but you're thinking, who's a good stealth choice? Hey, that guy who was in, just won an Oscar. He'll be great. We'll put him in this. What I loved about Doom was that, of course, he's a scientific genius, but also a sorcerer, the combination of the two. Yeah. And when you had both the magic from like Scarlet Witch and Doctor Doom, the kind of clearly embracing magic that Marvel was doing, then you had this kind of character who could fit into both worlds, who could kind of be in a Doctor Strange movie, because one of my favorite stories is Doom and Strange story, Triumph and Torment. So you could have him in that appearance. We could also have him, he could kind of connect into all of that. Hopefully they still do it. What do I know? But yes, back to the idea of who he would be. I mean, Luke Skywalker doesn't have he has a lot of the classic heroic journey, a lot of the classic super. What is missing is, in a way, the secret identity. And there was a period where comics were sort of like getting away from it. Secret identity is silly. I think there's always been an appeal to that to young people who are like, I have a secret you don't know,
right,
or I feel like I have an inner strength you don't know about. And perhaps that has always been, if we put it down, because Batman Zorro had existed for years, a rich guy fighting, people having fantastic abilities, supernatural abilities has gone on for generations. But I think, one key aspect of the superhero myth was, you go back to Extra Comics #1, it's like it's a revenge fantasy as played out of, they picked on a nerd, but the nerd, here's a surprise. He came in and gave it to them. And I think that's been a kind of through line. Same with, Hulk and Spider-Man and Daredevil, the idea of in Marvel specifically also, our disabilities don't define us.
Right. Yeah, very much a product of a benefit of coming around with that class of heroes 20 years later, or re-envisioning even the golden ones in a new light, for sure. I love this. I love the kind of distilling the hero bit of it that we have in video games, we have in film, we have in all this other media and fiction of all different types, but that the archetype here that we're looking at really has this duality of the secret identity, whether is Batman the real man or is Bruce Wayne the real man. I love all those kind of takes, but ultimately it's two sides of the same coin. It really is one person expressing themselves in two distinctly different ways. And I think that is definitely something that seems to be missing in a lot of the myths that we're currently bringing out. I think that, now that when you're online in so many places, you don't get to have an alias anymore, which
Yeah.
I naively thought was going to fix all of our online interaction problems when people had to actually put their name next to what they were saying. It didn't. It didn't at all.
No.
It actually made it way worse. So I really messed up that one. But the early days of the internet, where you would pick a username and that's where you were on all of your forums and chats and your email and your website and whatever else. And you did kind of have an alter ego, for better or worse, depending on how you chose to use it. But probably my favorite explanation of having the secret identity with a lot of these superheroes specifically is the idea that you're protecting your friends and family. Because yes, if your arch rival, if the Joker knew that that's who you were, of course he would go and take out, Alfred and all the people that have a home in that personal life that's so well documented, or is so easy to find out about, even if you're not a public figure in that way.
And their response sometimes is to, like the Flash show did this, other shows, it's like, okay, well, everyone's part of the team.
Yep.
Which then there is no normal world. And I think you do need to kind of have like the hero has a normal, he has the Aunt May. Aunt May, of course, is the way these stories hold up, she's sort of a classic example of the Fox News brainwashing, right? If you think about it.
Yeah, no, 100%.
It stands out. Like she's this lovely,
Yeah.
she's this lovely, wonderful lady, right? So nice, so whatever. But look, why? And I'm sure in the past you would think this doesn't make sense. Why would she believe this nonsense? James say that awful maybe Spider-Man was working with Dr. Octopus. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. But it's like now she's like someone sharing Facebook memes. It's like, well, maybe Obama did invent COVID. What are you talking about? Where'd you hear this? It's like, so it's amazing how these things, that there's a period where people would say, this is silly. Why would Aunt May? She's such a nice lady. Why would she believe this garbage? It's like, it happens. And we've seen this occur. But yes, the idea of protecting your loved ones, protecting the people close to you, having a form of yourself, the Matrix or the trans day of visibility. I posted.
Well, that's
the Matrix
super
clip.
Interesting about the idea of these dual personalities, or having a person you show the world and a person you are privately.
And I shared the clip of like the classic clip of, my name is Neo. And I was like, this, ever since I've seen this at the theater 25 years ago, everyone cheers. And yet a lot of those people who cheered seem to have missed the point. And then people respond to me. It's like, what are you talking about? Something to do with transits or whatever. It's like, okay, everyone gets that Mr. Smith calling people by their former name, calling him Mr. Anderson, is a sign of contempt. It's not just that he's a machine and doesn't understand new names. He is making a choice. It is shown in the way he performs it. He does it. It's to show, I'm dehumanizing you. He even does it when Cypher sells out the team. He's still Mr. Reagan. He's still dinging him. And the idea is that he accepts that dehumanization, whereas Neo doesn't. Neo's like, my name. And that's the big climatic moment of like, when Man of Steel came out, I'd be like, wow, that would have been great if instead of, snapping his neck, you'd had a similar moment of like, calling him Kal-El, and he does something of like, I'm Superman. Or something, some grand affirmation of, and maybe that's the big thing, because I think at their core, superhero comics had at least developed into a sense of heroism that I mean, you get some of that with the Jedi Code and sort of Code of the Thundercat, all the sort of stories that do these things, right? Ever Justice, Truth, Honor. But there's a inherent sense of our better angels. I mean, even the best Batman stories, as dark as they might get, it's about he's not a film noir character. He's only slightly worse than the villains. He is actually literally a knight. He doesn't kill. It's about protecting the best moment in Batman Year One. When he convinces Commissioner Gordon he's not just a nut job, that he saves a homeless woman. He's not just this billionaire dressing up, beating up poor people. He's this billionaire saving the most marginalized member of that society without a thought. And that is meant to be a sense of this is who these characters are, you know? It's about saving lives. There's again, Justice League cartoon where Batman is giving a pep talk to everyone and he's like, no one dies because of us, right. Which is the best, you know, if we don't save people, he takes that blame. It's my fault if I don't even save them. No one dies because of us, which is an inherent sense of not about being better or stronger. It's about, you know, heroism. And so that has to be ultimately what separates these characters from characters like the Doctor or others. I mean, the Doctor is also sort of heroic, but I think that kind of core and the great costumes. You got to embrace the costumes.
You got to be fabulous. And I think that, yeah, that is something that I especially see reflected in things like video game skins and being able to really customize or, you know, choose from an available set, or in the best games kind of make your own, where you do have a physical difference when there is something that is obvious. And quite often it is rather outlandish and out there because it's fantasy. It's not about looking like you look when you go to school or go to work. It's about standing out and kind of expressing who you are, which is something that ultimately I think a lot of this does really well. And even as you said very early on, a lot of the work, and not just the work from the 40s, the work from the 80s, and in a few years it'll be the work from today. It doesn't all hold up. It doesn't all reflect the values and the ideas of the people that are currently enjoying it and taking it in. But it's also a really interesting way to look at history, to look at it through these eyes. Absolutely.
And I'm a very sort of anti-cancellation person with art, because I think we can always learn from art. And when I go back at something and I say like, oh, maybe this, I think it's boring to just be like, oh, something written in 1986 is dated. Well, duh. It's more of like, well, what is it saying about our society at the time? What did it predict, or what did it get wrong? It's sort of interesting to sort of look into how we viewed the world, what we considered our heroes, what we consider our heroes now. And I think that's always been, I mean, with the superheroes, there's always a sense, because you're recreating them, but also you're recreating them each time with a sense of they've existed. So it's sort of, I was intrigued by Absolute that they actually said, well, what if he did come here as an adult? Like, we can sort of, what is his character if we take like, when does he stop being Superman? And I think that's an interesting question to at least ask, at least to justify. And if you're going to stick to kind of what your, not to go to, it's like when they essentially killed Robin because they felt like he was suddenly too silly. And they originally had written him out. And it all came down to, if you look at the history of Dick Grayson and Robin, they just couldn't. This would have been solved so much earlier if they just redesigned his costume to have pants.
Yep.
So
that's all he needed. He just needed pants.
So the Tim Drake costume, which later got co-opted to be Dick Grayson's in multiple cartoons, if that had been introduced when in the Teen Titans, Dick Grayson would still be Robin. He never would have been killed. But it was just, he's not. I remember this classic Teen Titans cover, and they're in the rain, and it's all cool and grim, and all of him, and he's got no pants. It's like, why aren't you wearing pants? And there used to be a thing of like, well, you don't have a problem with Wonder Woman wearing a bikini, and I'm like, I don't. Also, she has superpowers. She has superpowers. like I'm okay with Neymar in a beginning. Like, all right, that's a boss move, Neymar. I couldn't do that, but you
No.
can do it. But you have superpowers. Robin is like, what? Your boots are like your feet are wet. Your legs are. It makes no sense. And then later you get the later outfit. It's like, oh, that's great. That's fine. And that's that relationship would work. I'm a big fan of the other thing of like they keep changing. And of course, legally you have to keep the name Robin, right? And I remember, like, Son, very early on, it was like, what? Like, but that's his costume and his identity. It's like, and then you realize as a father, it's like, right, it's a terrible thing for me to just sort of, here's my next son. Okay, my son's, it's one that have hand-me-downs. So it's like, here's his identity. He worked very hard in this identity. It's yours now. I'm just going to keep giving people instead of like, well, why can't he just come up, why can't Jason come up with his own name? Why can't Tim come up with his own name? Yes, why not, my son? My son would not. He had no interest. Dick Grayson was Robin from a young age, and that's all he was interested in. So
I love that so
but
much.
So on that rambling note, I apologize.
No. Well, just to recap, I feel like there are three big things that I took away. One, Joe Chill, actually a hero. Number two,
For some members of the left, yes,
Lex
Joe Chill.
Luthor, maybe not all that bad. I think we need to delve into that a little bit more later on. He seemed to have some good ideas, I think you said, quoting you. And finally, I didn't know this before we talked today, but Obama came up with COVID, which was pretty cool. Pretty cool.
Exactly.
To find that out.
Aunt May's convinced that Obama is. I just love the story where she rants. I just want the one where the comic where she rants about Spider-Man and then starts ranting about some other classic conspiracies we see on Fox News and be like, oh dear.
Ancient aliens, who knows? Bless her heart.
Yes.
As long as it can be Marissa Tomei, I'm on board. So,
Yep.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining me to talk about Superman. I want you to tell folks listening where they can find out more about your writing, can read along, your entertainment that you're producing, as well as your own podcast. What's the best spot for people to do that?
Best place, my Substack, playtyperguy.com, as it sound, and I'm sure you'll have show notes. Please go to my YouTube, subscribe to my YouTube channel where I have interviews with people much like Lee. I'll probably have Lee in my podcast if I'm doing something, except he does a much better job hosting than I do. But yeah, those are the best two places. I am not at what was once Twitter. I left, but I am at Blue Sky until some other evil person takes it over. And
unless it's Lex, he again, good ideas. I think that.
Well, you need to show how is Metropolis suffering because of Lex Luthor was a question.
It seems to be clean and bright. And
I felt like that's something you would want to answer, right? Like you don't like what's the? I mean, and especially because Byrne had the thing where actually, Dr. Doom is a great leader of Latveria, and I wrote about that recently. It's like, what are you talking about? The people aren't free. Like that's not
exactly.
It's like, okay,
not a problem for John Byrne.
No. Apparently, these people could not handle freedom. So within 6 months, it's like the Lion King. In 6 months, the whole place, it was like the Pride Lands. And suddenly and Latveria had discovered crime, and so we need to put the Fantastic Four, working without the consent of the United States government, helps reinstall a fascist dictator who has tried on multiple occasions, who literally did 9/11s on New York, where he tried to blow up the Baxter Building. He's a terrorist, but let's put him back in control of a European power. So
the Department of Grim Efficiency. This guy's right out there. Let them take care of it. Stephen, you are the best. It has been delightful to hear your voice and to talk to you. Give my best to the fam, and
I will.
We'll do this again soon. I appreciate you, my friend.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
The Neighborhood Comics podcast is hosted by me, Lee Heidel. You can subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To support the show, shop our store online at neighborhoodcomics.com or subscribe to our Substack newsletter. Our theme song is provided by the band Ditka. Thanks for listening and enjoy your comics.